Welcome back to Askewed Reviews. And this week I'm doing movies all about The Wizard of Oz, as this year was the 85th anniversary of the original film. So, of course, today's review is for the 1939 film, The Wizard of Oz. Here is your trivia question for today. When Dorothy and the gang go to fight the Wicked Witch, they have an assortment of items to defeat her. The Tin Man has his axe and a wrench. The lion has a butterfly net and witch remover spray. What does the scarecrow have? The answer will be at the end of this episode. So, in the film The Wizard of Oz, we meet our main character of Dorothy Gale, who lives on a farm in Kansas with her Aunt Em and her Uncle Henry. Now, one day, a mean neighbor named Elmira Gulch has threatened to take away and put down Dorothy's dog Toto due to the fact that he keeps coming onto her property. So Dorothy attempts to run away with Toto, but as she's doing so, a cyclone comes flying through Kansas, and she tries to run back home as quickly as she can. Now, the problem is, once she gets there, the house is lifted up into the air and then eventually deposited down into the land of Oz, in a place called Munchkin Land. It's here where Dorothy meets Glinda the Good Witch and the Munchkins, who tell her how she can get back home, and the way she can do so is by following the yellow brick road to go to the Emerald City and speak to the Wizard of Oz. Along the way, she makes friends with a scarecrow, a tin man, and a lion, who all end up wanting help from the wizard as well. So, will they all get to the Wizard of Oz, or will the evil Wicked Witch end up stopping them? This movie is, of course, based off of the original book, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, or at least the first half of it. There is also a bunch of other books in this series, all written by L. Frank Baum. Unfortunately, when Baum was finishing the first book, his 5-month-old niece passed away. He did end up naming the main character Dorothy in honor of her. Victor Fleming was the director for this film, but he wasn't the only director. Originally, they brought in Richard Thorpe. Then they moved on to George Cukor, and then Mervyn Leroy. And then finally, King Vidor took over for Victor Fleming when he went off to start working on the film Gone with the Wind. So MGM had been wanting to make something to rival Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. They had also heard that Walt Disney wanted to do his own version of The Wizard of Oz, so they ended up buying the rights. Now, Disney would eventually make 3 of their own Oz movies. So Judy Garland, of course, plays the character of Dorothy Gale. She was hired on, though, to play a preteen when she was already 16, so she actually had to wear a corset at the time to appear younger and flat chested. Now, she wasn't the only actress up for the role, as Shirley Temple was the first one they reached out to but ended up needing to turn that down. There was also Deanna Durbin and Benita Granville. Also, when they first brought in Judy Garland, they originally had her wear a blonde wig and had heavy baby doll makeup. They ended up changing this, which I think was the right decision. Did you happen to know that Over the Rainbow was almost cut from the film as they felt there was too much time being spent in Kansas near the beginning? During the sequence in the film where Dorothy slaps the Cowardly Lion, Garland kept getting giggles. Victor Fleming took her aside, gave her a lecture, and then slapped her. Later on, he was talking to a crew member and mentioned how terrible he felt about it. Garland overheard this and actually forgave him. The day that Judy Garland passed away, there was actually a tornado in Kansas. The character of the Scarecrow was played by Ray Bolger, who was originally cast as the Tin Man, if you didn't know. He insisted he would rather play the Scarecrow, so he and Buddy Ebsen, who at the time was cast as the Scarecrow, swapped roles. However, the Tin Man's makeup contained aluminum dust. Ebsen had an allergic reaction and was unable to breathe. He was then hospitalized. MGM then recast the Tin Man with Jack Haley and changed the makeup. In case you recognize the name Buddy Ebsen, he would go on to play the character of Jed Clampett on the Beverly Hillbillies. Another thing related to makeup, the rubber prosthetic with woven burlap patterns on it that Ray Bolger wore as the Scarecrow took over a year for some of that pattern to vanish from his face. The character of the Tin Man is played by Jack Haley. In the song If I Only Had a Heart, there is a voice that says, "Wherefore art thou, Romeo?" This was actually Adriana Caselotti, who was the voice of Snow White from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. The character of the Cowardly Lion is played by Bert Lair. Did you happen to know, though, that the costume he wore weighed 90 pounds and was actually made from real lion skin? Now, before using a human, they did think about using an actual lion, and MGM was going to use their mascot, Jackie, to do so. They would have also had a voiceover actor doing the dialogue. The Wicked Witch of the West was played by Margaret Hamilton, but they almost went with Edna May Oliver. Due to the copper that was in Hamilton's green face paint, she actually had a green hue to her skin for months after production. Also, when the Wicked Witch bursts into flames leaving Munchkinland, Hamilton's cape got caught, and when the fire burst upwards, her makeup heated up, causing second and third degree burns on her hands and face. Now, obviously, Hamilton also does play Elmira Gulch, but did you happen to know that she plays a third character? When you see the witch outside of Dorothy's window, that's not the Wicked Witch of the West, but the Wicked Witch of the East. If you look carefully, you can see that she has sparkly shoes, meaning the ruby slippers that Dorothy would soon get off of her. Speaking of the slippers, in the original book, the slippers are silver, but due to the fact that they knew that they were going to be using Technicolor, they decided to go with ruby because it would look more stunning. The character of Glinda was played by Billie Burke, but there were quite a few other actresses up for the role, including Fanny Brice, Beatrice Lilly, Constance Collier, Gracie Fields, Helen Gilbert, Una Merkel, Cora Witherspoon, and Helen Troy. The Wizard of Oz and Professor Marvel are both played by Frank Morgan, but the role was originally written for W.C. Fields. He ended up turning it down. So some other actors who were also up for the role were Ed Wynn, Wallace Beery, Robert Benchley, Hugh Herbert, Victor Moore, and Charles Winnegar. There's an interesting story related to the jacket that Morgan has. The wardrobe department wanted something that once looked elegant but is no longer looking so. They visited a second-hand store and they found the perfect coat. One day while on set, Morgan discovered a label in the jacket, L. Frank Baum, the original author of The Wizard of Oz. They did eventually manage to authenticate this with Baum's widow. After filming, they gave the coat back to her. Aunt Em was played by Clara Blandick, but the role almost went to Sarah Padden or May Robson. Uncle Henry is played by Charlie Grapewin, but was almost played by Harlan Briggs. Here's something you may not have known, but a good majority of the Munchkins' voices were actually done by Pinto Colvig, who at the time was the voice of Goofy. Speaking of the Munchkin actors, they apparently were quite a handful to deal with behind the scenes. In fact, there's even a 1981 comedy called Under the Rainbow, which does a parody version of what happened. Also, the last living Munchkin, Jerry Marin, passed away in 2018. At one point, they considered having a human play Toto, but instead they hired this dog named Terry. The three horses in the Emerald City were colored with gelatin. The scene had to be shot quickly before the horses licked it all off. The twister that appears in the film was a long muslin stocking that was spun around miniatures of Kansas. During the scene where the flying monkeys descend upon the group, quite a few of the actors were injured as the piano wires suspending them snapped and dropped them several feet. There was a long-running rumor that a Munchkin actor had hung themselves in the background of a scene. It eventually turned out to be a crested crane, and they discovered this due to enhancements in the footage. The snow that was used in the poppy field scene was 100% industrial grade asbestos. If you get a chance, look up something called The Dark Side of the Rainbow. This is an interesting syncing up of The Wizard of Oz and Pink Floyd's album Dark Side of the Moon. This movie was filmed entirely in California. There were actually talks of a sequel with the original cast returning, but this never got past the development stage. So when it comes to the film The Wizard of Oz, this is an absolute classic, and it's no surprise that this is the most watched movie in film history. I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5. If you like this film, other movies I recommend checking out are March of the Wooden Soldiers, Babes in Toyland, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and Bedknobs and Broomsticks. Time to answer the trivia question. When Dorothy and the gang go to fight the Wicked Witch, they have an assortment of items to defeat her. The Tin Man has his axe and a wrench, the Lion has a butterfly net and witch remover spray, but what does the Scarecrow have? So when you take a look, you can see all of the items I've mentioned so far. But what's that the Scarecrow is holding? Oh, it's a gun. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Askewed Reviews. And if there's a movie you'd like to see get a review, just mention it in the comments.